Welcome to Face Toward Zion. The Come Follow Me curricula for August 10th through the 16th covers Alma chapters 53 through 63. We end the book of Alma. For this week's cover, I initially chose a painting titled, "It's True, Sir, All Present and Accounted For" by Clark Kelly Price. I thought this was a very appropriate painting since the 2,000 Stripling Warriors all survived, but as I thought about it, I kept coming back to this painting titled, "Farewell, My Stripling Warrior" by Del Parson. I think this painting better shows the inner struggle of these chapters. This is what Del Parson said about this painting. This image was inspired by my wife and son while he was leaving on his mission. We were at the airport saying our goodbyes, and I watched him as he hugged my wife. She was hanging on, having a hard time letting him go, and he was hugging her, but he was looking beyond her, towards the airplane. He was obviously ready to go. The expression on her face was one of trepidation. It was as if she were asking herself, "Have I prepared him for this? Have I done all I could?" While his expression was one of eager determination. He had been preparing so long for this, and he was ready to get started. That moment made me think about the story of the Stripling Warriors. Those 2,000 young men had never fought before. They had no idea what they were up against or what to expect going into battle against the Lamanites, but that didn't matter to them. They were prepared in spirit and in faith. They knew that the things their mothers had taught them were true, and they were willing to march into the unknown with their strength and courage coming from their faith. I think about those young men and their resolve to defend their families and their homes. They went forth with bravery, and they succeeded. Then I think about their mothers. I know how worried and afraid they must have been. That's what moms do. They worry and they wonder if they have prepared their sons. That is really the feeling I wanted to portray in this painting. There's a lot that happens in these chapters. There's no way to cover it all, but chapter titles can help us remember what is in them. For Alma Chapter 53, I gave the means title as the 2,000 Stripling Warriors, while the ends is the value of an oath and a covenant. Alma Chapter 53, letters between Moroni and Amoron, or a terse accusation brings a defensive response. Alma Chapter 55, Gidri taken through strategy, or Lamanites have an alcohol problem. Alma Chapter 56, Helaman's epistle, or fighting with the strength of God. Alma Chapter 57, all Stripling Warriors survive, or rewarded according to faith. Alma Chapter 58, Helaman finishes his epistle, or peace during wartime. Alma Chapter 59, Lamanites renew the offensive, or wickedness hurts morale. Alma Chapter 60, an angry letter to the governor, or first cleanse the inner vessel. Alma Chapter 61, things aren't well in Zarahemla, or a leader not in touch. Alma Chapter 62, Nephites finally win, or the power of righteousness. And Alma Chapter 63 is new colonies begin, or expansion. When you read chapters 53 through 63, the storyline really is about Helaman and the 2,000 Stripling Warriors. We all know the story. We are as the armies of Helaman, we have been taught in our youth. The story is pretty straightforward. Ammon and his brothers go on a mission to the Lamanites and convert King Lamoni and his father. A number of Lamanites convert. They bury their weapons of war and make a covenant to never again shed blood. They separate themselves from the Lamanites and call themselves the Anti-Nephi Lehies. They move close to the Nephites. The Lamanites attack the Nephites. After some tough battles, the Anti-Nephi Lehi start to have second thoughts. It's hard to watch those who are protecting you die because the enemies want to hurt you. But it came to pass that when they saw the danger and the many afflictions and tribulations which the Nephites bore for them, they were moved with compassion and were desirous to take up arms in the defense of their country. How do you like it when others have to fight your battles? Before they succumb to this temptation, the young men who were too young to make this covenant step up and go to battle to defend their country. There is a big battle, many on both sides are killed, but miraculously none of the young Stripling Warriors die. It truly is a miracle. We are grateful for the 2,000 Stripling Warriors. This is a very stirring story. But what happens if you are one of the children of the Nephites? How do you feel if your father or your brother or your neighbor was killed in the battle, but the 2,000 Stripling Warriors all survived? We know that God can and has protected his children in battle. Why does he seem to protect some, yet others perish? We are grateful when a member of our family survives a bout with cancer, but what about the family of those who don't survive? Why does God protect some and not others? Why do some live long lives, yet others are taken off and in their prime? These are very tough questions. I gave some answers with Alma Chapter 36 when Alma gave advice to his son Helaman. We are ordained to have trials, troubles, and afflictions. But when does God step in and protect his children? I would like to talk about the Davidic Covenant. It seems to me that covenants can play a role in the way God protects his people. We all remember that the Book of Mormon begins with, I Nephi having been born of goodly parents. But do we remember verse 4? It says, For it came to pass in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah, my father Lehi having dwelt at Jerusalem in all his days, and in that very same year there came many prophets, prophesying unto the people that they must repent, or the great city Jerusalem must be destroyed. Who was Zedekiah king of Judah? The children of Israel had a tendency to rebel. In one rebellious cycle, they decided they wanted a king. The Lord chose Saul, and it didn't work out very well. The Lord then chose David. David was able to ascend to the throne and establish a kingdom unlike any other of Israel. God loved David, and in 2 Samuel chapter 7, God establishes a covenant with David, known as the Davidic Covenant. Now, remember that one of the purposes of the Book of Mormon, as stated on the title page, is that they may know the covenants of the Lord. These covenants include covenants God made with Adam, Enoch, Noah, Melchizedek, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, as well as others. We focus on the Abrahamic covenant, but what is this Davidic covenant? Among other things, it includes protection from, quote, all thine enemies, unquote. It includes that through his descendancy will come the Messiah. Remember the references to Christ being the son of David. And a throne will be set up which will last forever. Quote, I will be his father, and he shall be my son, unquote. This throne of David passed from one to another until it came to Zedekiah, who was the last in the line of the Davidic kings. So, when Lehi left Jerusalem, the Jerusalem people were still under this Davidic covenant. A new covenant was established with Lehi upon this promised land. King Zedekiah was captured by Babylon, but in the New World a worthy ruler followed, and the priesthood carried on down. It came to the point where it resided in Alma, but in last week's lesson Alma was translated and the priesthood fell upon Helaman. Helaman held the keys of the covenants of the fathers here in the promised land. Although they taught of Christ, they continued to participate in the ordinances and laws of Moses. Still active was the protection under the Davidic and the Lehitic covenants. In that day, Helaman was God's anointed here in the promised land. So one of the things that the Book of Mormon does is it teaches us about the great things that the Lord hath done for their fathers, and that they may know the covenants of the Lord. Covenants, covenants. Let's read what it says. This is in chapter 53, verses 16 through 22. But behold, it came to pass they had many sons, who had not entered into a covenant, that they would not take their weapons of war to defend themselves against their enemies. Therefore they did assemble themselves together at this time, as many as were able to take up arms, and they called themselves Nephites. Sorry to interrupt, but this is interesting. Their parents made a big deal to call themselves the anti-Nephi Lehis, and now here come the children and throw off that name. And they called themselves Nephites. They were willing to give up their heritage in order to be associated with the people of God. They were all in with this new commitment. And they, quote, entered into a covenant, unquote, to fight for the liberty of the Nephites, yea, to protect the land and to the laying down of their lives. Yea, even they covenanted that they would never give up their liberty, but they would fight in all cases to protect the Nephites and themselves from bondage. Now behold, there were 2,000 of these young men who entered into this covenant, and took their weapons of war to defend their country. For they took their weapons of war, and they would that Helaman should be their leader. Now, who is Helaman again? He is God's appointed servant to the Nephites. He is the one who holds the keys of the Lehitic and the Davidic covenants. Included in these covenants are a promise of protection, if they are worthy. And they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage, and also for strength and activity. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. And now it came to pass that Helaman did march at the head of his 2,000 stripling warriors. Remember the children of Israel with Moses. There was bickering going on right from the start. Moses couldn't do anything right, and everyone had a better solution. Remember Zion's camp. There was bickering going on right from the start. Joseph couldn't do anything right, and everyone had a better solution. How about the 2,000 stripling warriors? They were true at all times. They kept the commandments of God. Can you imagine what they talked about among themselves? I bet they said things like, "We're going to do whatever Helaman asks. If he says turn right, we'll turn right. If he says go left, we'll go left. Whatever he says, we won't even hesitate. We will just do it." Wouldn't you like to know more about them? Who were these kids? Sadly, we don't know more, but we know some things. Their fathers made a covenant that they buried their weapons and would never again shed blood. The Lamanites came against them. They came to kill them. They came to take away everything that they had. And these people went out and knelt before their enemies, and many of them were slain. I imagine many of their fathers were among these that were killed. I imagine many of these 2,000 stripling warriors were raised by single mothers. That is why they stressed their mothers knew. Now they had never fought, yet they did not fear death. And they did think more upon the liberty of their fathers than they did upon their lives. Yea, they had been taught by their mothers that if they did not doubt, God would deliver them. And they rehearsed unto me the words of their mothers, saying, "We do not doubt, our mothers knew it." Now, before we get too carried away, and I'm about to do that, we need to include verse 27, which says, "And now it came to pass in the 2nd month of this year, there was brought unto us many provisions from the fathers of those my 2,000 sons." So, not all of them were raised by single mothers. Many still had fathers. With that said, it is still interesting to see the role of women and mothers in the Book of Mormon. We really don't hear a lot about the women. Last week I remarked it was interesting that of the 3 contemporary women named, one was the harlot Isabel. That doesn't always give a good impression of women. But the Lamanite culture seemed to be a little different than the Nephite culture. Remember the story when Ammon and his brothers go into the king. Remember, it's the queen who plays a major role in the conversion of her people. Then it is one of the 3 named women, Abish, who saves the lives of the king and the queen. Of the 3 women named, Abish is a Lamanite. And now, here is this story. It's pointed out so specifically that it is their mothers that taught them. These young men were brought up in the Lamanite culture, not the Nephite culture. In the rest of the Book of Mormon that concentrates on the Nephite culture, the women are hardly mentioned. But here in Lamanite culture, the women have a major presence. And it is here with the Lamanite culture that we see the influence that mothers have on these incredible young men. So why are there times, like with the anti-Nephite Lehi, when the Lord suffers them to be killed by their enemies, or when Alma suffered the righteous to be burned in fire at Ammonihah, and why does he sometimes step in and save the 2,000 stripling warriors? This really is a tough question. To answer it, I think it takes faith. In Isaiah it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." I think we don't always know what God knows. He knows things we don't, and sometimes we have to just leave it to Him. We are grateful when He reaches down and touches us, and when He doesn't reach down, then we should also be grateful for the blessings we have. The Book of Mormon is very clear that in the end, we will be on the receiving end of God's mercy and justice. In the end, we will say that God is just and merciful. Remember Alma's words to Zeezrom. We must come forth and stand before him in his glory, and in his power, and in his might, majesty, and dominion, and acknowledge to our everlasting shame that all his judgments are just, that he is just in all his works, and that he is merciful unto the children of men, and that he has all power to save every man that believeth on his name, and bringeth forth fruit meet for repentance. In the meantime, what do? I think this is the same as last week. We follow Alma's counsel to his son. See that you are merciful unto your brethren, deal justly, judge righteously, and do good continually. We need to be grateful for what we have and move forward. To add one more thing, we must also believe. Remember the story where a man brought his son to the Lord and asked him to heal him. He had previously brought him to his apostles, and they could not cure him, but Christ did heal him. Later the apostles asked why they couldn't cure him. And Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of a mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Howbeit this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. So, we must believe, and it also takes prayer and fasting. Here the Lord is our supreme example. How often did he go to the mount to pray? And at the end of chapter 59, the Lamanites start to get the upper hand on the Nephites. And now when Moroni saw that the city of Nephihah was lost, he was exceedingly sorrowful, and began to doubt because of the wickedness of the people whether they should not fall into the hands of their brethren. Now this was the cause with all his chief captains. They had doubted and marveled also because of the wickedness of the people, and this because of the success of the Lamanites over them. And it came to pass that Moroni was angry with his government because of their indifference concerning the freedom of their country. Kind of sounds like today, doesn't it? It's been said that the Book of Mormon is a type and a shadow of what is to come. These are the events that happened in this country prior to the first coming of the Lord. Many of these things will be similar right before the second coming of the Lord. The people had fallen into wickedness and are indifferent concerning the freedom of their country. When Captain Moroni sees this, he becomes furious and writes a scathing letter to the government. In chapter 60, he doesn't mince words. Can you think to sit upon your thrones in a state of thoughtless stupor, while your enemies are spreading the work of death around you, yea, while they are murdering thousands of your brethren? Don't you just love that? Can you think to sit upon your thrones in a state of thoughtless stupor? Kind of sounds like Congress today. But Captain Moroni doesn't just stop there. He says he will take part of his army, quote, and I will come unto you, and if there be any among you that has a desire for freedom, yea, if there be even a spark of freedom remaining, behold, I will stir up insurrections among you, even until those who have desire to assert power and authority shall become extinct, unquote. And so Captain Moroni threatens the government itself. Captain Moroni understands that the vessel itself can't stand if it is corrupt from within. He says that first you must cleanse the inner vessel. Fortunately, Pahoran understands Moroni's words and in fact has been dealing with problems of his own. Pahoran asks Moroni to come and help him first. Then they can unite against their enemies. Therefore, my beloved brother Moroni, let us resist evil, and whatsoever evil we cannot resist with our words, yea, such as rebellions and dissensions, let us resist them with our swords, that we may retain our freedom, that we may rejoice in the great privilege of our church and in the cause of our Redeemer and our God. I think that this is always good advice. Let us resist evil. And when people try to make evil look good and justify evil, then let us resist evil. Yes, none of us are perfect, but we must not confuse evil with good, and we must look to the Lord. Captain Moroni marches against those creating rebellion in his own land. And he did raise the standard of liberty in whatsoever place he did enter. And with the standard of liberty he was able to cleanse the inner vessel, and then united they were able to defeat the Lamanites. Before I close, I want to mention one other individual that stands out, and that is a man named Teancum. I am drawn to this man because of my great-great-grandfather on my mother's side. He was named Teancum and went by T. In fact, my grandfather was named after his two grandfathers and was named Rudolph Teancum. As a boy, I thought that was the coolest name ever, to be named after this incredible general in the Book of Mormon, but also Rudolph. I thought that anyone with a name like that should have good ends with Santa Claus. In Alma Chapter 51, after a tough battle, and it came to pass that Teancum stole privately into the tent of the king, and put a javelin to his heart, and he did cause the death of the king immediately, that he did not wake his servants. And he returned again privately to his own camp, and behold, his men were asleep, and he awoke them and told them all the things that he had done. How hard would it be to sneak into your enemy's camp, then sneak into the king and kill him without even waking him up, and then sneak back to your camp? Pretty impressive, huh? But once Captain Moroni cleansed the inner vessel, then together Moroni and Lehi and Teancum were able to drive the Lamanites from their lands. As they were starting to wrap things up, Teancum knew that they had to take out Ammoron. With him gone, the war would be over. And it came to pass that Teancum in his anger did go forth into the camp of the Lamanites, and did let himself down over the walls of the city. And he went forth with a cord from place to place, insomuch that he did find the king, and he did cast a javelin at him, which did pierce him near the heart. But behold, the king did awaken his servants before he died, insomuch that they did pursue Teancum and slew him. Now it came to pass that when Lehi and Moroni knew that Teancum was dead, they were exceedingly sorrowful. For behold, he had been a man who had fought valiantly for his country, yea, a true friend to liberty, and he had suffered very many exceedingly sore afflictions. But behold, he was dead, and had gone the way of all the earth. In this verse I have often wondered the significance of why Teancum went from place to place with a cord. What would a cord do to help him? Surely it must mean something, or it wouldn't have been included. The only thing I can think of is he used the cord in letting himself down over the city wall, and perhaps he was going to use this for his escape. Still, why would this be mentioned? While it ends for Teancum, he is still the one who facilitated the end of the war. Because of him, thousands would live. What a great man. Wouldn't you like to be named after Teancum? I would like to close with some words from President Uchtdorf. I remember when I first heard this talk, I was a little confused. Sometimes the answers to difficult questions are hard to find. But since then, I have learned there is wisdom in this counsel. Yes, it's hard, but if we are grateful, then our hearts won't become hardened, and we will be able to make it through our difficult times. May we be grateful in whatsoever circumstances we may find ourselves.
Over the years, I have had the sacred opportunity to meet with many people whose sorrows seem to reach the very depths of their soul. In these moments, I have listened to my beloved brothers and sisters and grieved with them over their burdens. I've pondered what to say to them, and I have struggled to know how to comfort and support them in their trials. Often their grief is caused by what seems to them as an ending. Some are facing the end of a cherished relationship, such as the death of a loved one or estrangement from a family member. Others feel they are facing the end of hope, the hope of being married or bearing children or overcoming an illness. Others may be facing the end of their faith as confusing and conflicting voices in the world tempt them to question, even abandon what they once knew to be true. Sooner or later, I believe that all of us experience times when the very fabric of our world tears at the seams, leaving us feeling alone, frustrated, and adrift. It can happen to anyone. No one is immune. Everyone's situation is different, and the details of each life are unique. Nevertheless, I have learned that there is something that would take away the bitterness that may come into our lives. There's one thing we can do to make life sweeter, even joyful, and even glorious. We can be grateful.